All right, looks like we are live. Everybody, welcome to Standing for Truth. If you enjoy the content that we put out, including the debates, interviews, and discussions, then please hit that subscribe button and also make sure to tell others about us as well. Now, tonight is the big night. This is the much anticipated debate between Atheist Jr. and Dr. Kent Hovind. They will be debating, should evolution be taught in public schools? This is an exciting one. This is sure going to be one to remember. I can guarantee you that. And let's waste no time. You guys came here to see the debaters and not me. So why don't we kind of break the ice here? Dr. Hovind and AJ, thanks so much for being here. Gentlemen, you guys are on mute, but why don't we do a couple brief introductions first? Who you are, what's going over at your ministry. Dr. Hovind, you've been here about 18 times, so you're no stranger to this channel and ministry. Thanks again for giving us your time, Dr. Hovind.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. If you wanted to give a brief introduction, Kent, what's going on over at Dino? Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. My name is Kent Hovind. I was a high school science and math teacher 15 years. I've been an ordained Baptist preacher for 47 years. I take the position the Bible is absolutely true, cover to cover, and the earth was made in 6 days by God, just like he said he did. Dinosaurs lived with man all through history. They did not live millions of years ago. The flood of Noah is the only reasonable, logical way to explain all the geology that we see on the earth. The geologic column does not exist anywhere on the planet. There is no evidence for evolution whatsoever. Evolution is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the history of humanity. There's never been a dumber idea than to believe mosquitoes and whales are related and came from a common ancestor. So those are the nice things. We have a dinosaur adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, a theme park, a museum, a science center. It's all free. Come on down. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Hovind. I do plan to visit one day. So thanks again. And why don't we hand it over to Atheist Jr. You are on mute. Just make sure you unmute yourself. Brief introduction. This is your first time debating on this channel. So tell the audience who you are. And if they were to go check out your channel, what are they going to find?
Yes, I personally don't have a theme park. I do have a YouTube channel, though. And on my channel, I talk about religion and the problems I find with it. I have interviews with atheists and theists alike. People of all religions and non-religions are welcome on my channel, so I want to create a welcome environment just like SFT does. So that's about it for me.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this debate. This is an important topic, that's for sure. Before we get right into it, I want to go over the format for the evening for the audience. So we are going to be starting with 10-minute opening statements. Atheist Jr. is going to start. He's in the affirmative today, followed by uninterrupted 5-minute rebuttals, and then an equally timed cordial discussion. I will moderate, of course, and we'll keep it to one topic at a time. We'll end it with 3-minute concluding statements and then an audience Q&A. So everybody, please make sure you're tagging me at Standing for Truth. We usually have a lively audience, so I don't want to miss your question. Make sure you are tagging me. That being said, let's waste no more time. Atheist Jr., the floor is yours. If you need to screen share, let me know and I can do so. You have 10 minutes whenever you're ready.
Okay, should I share my screen?
Yes.
On my end? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, SFT. Thanks, Kent, for being here. Okay. So there was a reason that I chose the topic of today's debate to be, should evolution be taught in public schools? Now, right off the bat, I want to define a few words. Evolution, a change in allele frequencies in a population over generations. Microevolution, variation within species driven by natural selection. Macroevolution, genetic changes at and above the species level, which includes speciation. Micro and macroevolution are both subsets of evolution. They encompass the same process, but at different scales. Science. Science is two things. One, the pursuit of data and understanding of the natural world following a systematic methodology based on evidence. 2, the process of using the scientific method to research these natural phenomena, do experiments, and make novel, testable predictions. Now, Kent conflates my definition of evolution with Big Bang cosmology and the origin of life because he's attempting to back up his argument that evolution is a religion. So he's forced to say it goes all the way back to the beginning of the universe, like creationism does. Kent claims that evolution should not be taught in public schools because it is a religion. Evolutionary theory does not describe a moral code to follow, the origin of the universe, or life on Earth, and does not describe an afterlife. I would have preferred to ask, should young Earth creationism be taught in public schools? But I knew Kent wouldn't accept that topic. This is because Kent absolutely will not defend his own worldview during a debate. Kent will not defend the Bible, likely because of the fact that there are many passages in the Bible that he knows are indefensible. In fact, I could write a better book than the Bible. All I would have to do is take the King James Version, rewrite it word for word, but reverse all of the pro-slavery sections to be anti-slavery. Now, Kent will try to poke holes in evolution, but if someone ever tries to challenge Kent to defend creationism or the Bible in a debate, he will say, I'm not asking for my theory to be taught at taxpayer expense in the public schools. Now, this is not true. It's just Kent's get-out-of-jail-free card in debates. It's him trying to shift the burden of proof onto me. Kent published and sold a video called Public School Presentation, where the intro says teachers can teach using the Bible. He also sold a book by Duane Gish titled Teaching Creation Science in Public Schools. And Kent has tried to get what he calls lies out of the textbooks. He did this by trying to influence legislation in Arkansas by working with Representative Jim Holt to draft House Bill 2548. Now, the point of this bill was to limit and change what could be printed in textbooks. The examples given were classic Hovind talking points about vestigial structures, the geologic column, carbon dating not working, etc. The bill attempted to block public schools from spending tax dollars on textbooks that contained quote-unquote false or fraudulent information. So this bill claimed to have a list of information taught as facts about evolution that has all been proven wrong. However, I can show that at least one of the claims featured is false and fraudulent. It claims that carbon dating is ineffective because of an example given of a mammoth's lower leg having one date and its skin having a different date. However, if we look at the actual scientific paper that the information came from, we can see that the first date on the top right, if you can see that with the red arrow, is 1940. But the date on the bottom right is 1948, meaning that these two specimens were not the same animal. They were a different animal. It was not the same mammoth. Now, creationists say that evolution can't be true because we weren't there in the distant past to observe it. But we do see evolution happening today. In the lab, scientists studied a form of unicellular algae called Chlamydomonas. They exposed the algae to a filter-feeding predator, and in response to predation, several specimens evolved multicellularity as a defense mechanism. So this is a true multicellular organism that used to be single-celled, and the experiment happened over 50 weeks. Now, Kent might say that it's still an algae, but normally this algae is single-celled and only brings forth more single-celled algae. But this is a new kind of algae, a multicellular one with new genetic information. It got new traits like an extracellular matrix. This is not just a colony because each cell cannot live on its own. And this is beneficial to the survival of the organism because it is now too big for the predator to eat. Kent likes to compare two intentionally different organisms and then ask if they are related. He did it in his opening intro. He does this intentionally to make common ancestry seem like it goes against common sense. He won't instead ask if a gerbil and hamster are related. But if he's going to ask how a mosquito and a whale are related, or rather how an insect and a mammal are related, I'll do my best to answer it. DNA is the carrier of genetic information in living things. It is the reason that a dog only gives birth to other dogs. Both insects and mammals have DNA in their cells. By sequencing insect and mammal DNA, which involves looking carefully at the order of nucleotides, the CATG, scientists can see just how closely living things are related. So if you want proof of common ancestry, it is shown in the genetics. Genetics look at the order of nucleotides in DNA, Amino acids are coded for by mRNA to make proteins. But the important part is that we intimately understand the mechanisms of evolution. We can test them, and we can understand how these contribute to evolutionary novelties. We can take that information and generate a tree of life from it. So why should evolution be taught in schools? The reason it is taught in schools is because it has produced cures for diseases such as penicillin. It is also used in the research of AIDS, cancer, and more. So schools need to educate the next generation of scientists and doctors and give them the tools needed to continue fighting novel pathogens, deadly microbes, and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It has also led to new discoveries and breakthroughs in agriculture and farming. For example, by using artificial selection, humans created the modern Cavendish banana and created broccoli from the wild mustard plant. Now, this has led to less world hunger. So it's important that the new generation of agriculture students and farmers learn about evolution. Students can learn about topics that might conflict with their religion without compromising their beliefs. Evolutionary theory is one of the fundamental building blocks of our understanding of life, as it is currently the best existing scientific explanation of the way our species came to be. How evolution works is vital for all students to understand. Students should not opt out of learning about a central tenet of contemporary science. But if they have religious objections to the theory's implications, the public school has no right to insist that they believe it, that is, to regard evolutionary theory as true. They don't have to believe that humans evolved from a fundamentally different species, but it's important that they understand why a majority of scientists agree that we do. So Kent is free to disagree with the scientific consensus, but arguing that kids shouldn't learn about evolution at all and framing it as dangerous, forbidden knowledge is unfair. At least let them learn the subject matter and truly understand it, and then decide for themselves if they believe it. We are entering the next century in which the United States will be even more dependent on science and technology than it has been. Our country's future demands a citizenry able to use many of the same skills that scientists use in their fields every day: observation, careful reasoning, critical as well as creative thinking based on what is known about the world. Having an ability to use scientific knowledge and critical thinking depends on the education that people receive in K through 12. So if Kent wants to argue that evolution should not be taught and claims that he is not asking for creationism to be taught, then I would like him to explain what should be taught. Should it simply be neither? If evolution has the burden of proof, in my opinion, it has satisfied it many times over and has lapped young earth creationism. If Kent thinks he has no burden of proof, he has no justification to say that creationism should be taught outside of his YouTube channel. So I say, let creationists teach what they want in Sunday school, but stay out of public schools. And that's my opening statement.
Okay, well, thank you for that opening there. AJ, you got a couple minutes to spare, so I'll throw it into the open discussion period. Dr. Hovind, whenever you are ready, you've got 10 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I understand why guys like Atheist Jr. and others do not want to really give the whole meaning of the word evolution. They want to start with macro and micro evolution, when quite obviously you have to have something to evolve. Where did life get started? The 6 meanings that I have given for decades are cosmic evolution. Where did time, space, matter come from? That's certainly a phrase they use, cosmic evolution. You can Google that. It's found all over the place. And it is taught in schools, the Big Bang Theory. So that should not be taught. If he doesn't want evolution, if that's not part of evolution, well, then take the Big Bang out of the textbooks. It's not part of science. Then you'd have to have the chemical evolution, where the hydrogen from the Big Bang evolved into all the other elements. That's never been observed. That's a religious belief, but it's not science. Then you'd have to have stellar and planetary evolution. We've never seen a star form. We've never seen a planet form. Nobody has ever. So, but they're out there. So how did it happen? They have to be able to give an answer for that if they want to teach it in public school. Our discussion tonight is, should evolution be taught in public schools? There's a much bigger question. Should we have public schools? Maybe the parents ought to be teaching their kids what they want them to learn, but that's a different topic. The origin of life has never been answered. How did life get started? And if a bunch of intelligent scientists someday do create life in the laboratory, all that would prove is it takes intelligence to make life, which is what I've been saying all along. But AJ wants to start with macro evolution, changing from one kind to another. And he says it's the same thing as micro evolution. This is absolute baloney. Nobody's ever seen an animal change to a different kind of animal. Let's see. What we've observed is 339 recognized breeds of dogs now in 10 different groups. They still had a common ancestor called a dog. And yet AJ believes an amoeba turned into a dog. They will divert attention from this obvious teaching by saying, well, of course, dogs produce dogs. That's what evolution says. Well, that's an absolute lie, because evolution's, if they believe dogs produce dogs and amoeba produce amoeba, did the amoeba eventually produce a dog over billions or trillions of years? I'll give you all the time you want. So they do teach that animals change to a different kind of animal, which is not, the Bible says clearly 10 times in the first chapter and 10 more times in the flood story that the animals bring forth after their kind. Now Darwin, apologize, I've been talking all day on tours here. Darwin muddied the water by titling his book The Origin of Species. Well, is species the same as kind? I don't think so. In some cases it might be. Microevolution is variation within the same kind, and that one has been observed. Evolutionary changes within a species or small group of organisms, especially over a short period of time. Developing 339 breeds of dogs from a dog would be considered microevolution, and that is part of science, and that's as far as it goes. Example of microevolution. They're talking about antibiotic resistance, pesticide resistance, herbicide resistance. The mosquitoes in the north, in region 8, are bigger than the mosquitoes, or no, sparrows, I'm sorry. Sparrows are larger in Minnesota than they are in Florida. Wow. Okay, they're still a sparrow. And the bigger bodied sparrows are going to survive better where it's cold because they maintain the heat better. It's a simple surface area to volume ratio problem. Bigger animals have more body mass to maintain their heat. Of course, they're going to be bigger up north. But they say that's an example of evolution. The mosquito population. They've evolved over billions of years. The mosquitoes have evolved the ability to wait 9 more days to go dormant. It's still a mosquito. They're so desperate for examples. I have been saying for years, and AJ says he's watched all my videos. That's wonderful. Thank you, AJ. I just wish they would not use lies to teach their theory. If you want to teach evolution, fine, but don't use lies as an example. Like Haeckel taught about the embryo developing in the mother having gill slits. This was made up in 1869 and proven wrong in 1874. Here's the actual drawings, human embryo. There's Haeckel's drawings. He lied. He doctored them up, made them look alike. He had big charts of it. This chart right here is Haeckel's chart, proven wrong in 1874, still in the textbooks right beside me. Now, AJ, if you've got some evidence for evolution, I'd like to see it, but don't use the gill slits. And for me to go with Jim Holt and others and say, look, take the lies out of the books. Get this lie out of the book. AJ, if you value truth and science, why aren't you on a campaign to get the gill slit theory out of all the biology textbooks? Because it's not science. Haeckel was tried at a university, his own university held a trial. 6 other professors said, Haeckel, you faked the drawings, man, you lied. On top are his drawings, underneath are actual photographs. He lied. He said, a small percentage of my drawings are forgeries. Those, namely, for which the observed material is so incomplete or insufficient as to fill in and reconstruct the missing links by hypothesis and comparative synthesis. He said, I should feel utterly condemned were it not that hundreds of the best observers and biologists lie under the same charge. Wait a minute. His defense was, it's okay to lie because other people lie. No, get it out of the book. This has been proven as a fake for a long time, AJ, and you know it. But I would guarantee you haven't spent 3 seconds trying to get this lie out of the textbook, because this lie supports your religion of evolution. The human embryo itself at the very early period can hardly be distinguished from that of other members of the vertebrate kingdom, Charles Darwin said, based on Haeckel's fake drawings. These were frauds. It was brought to public attention in 1911, 110 years ago, a book called Haeckel's Frauds and Forgeries. So it's not true. I don't mind if they want to teach evolution, but they shouldn't be lying. Back in 1956, when I was 3 years old, they said the biogenetic law as a proof for evolution is valueless. There's no value to it. The biogenetic law cannot be weeded out. It's been proven wrong, 1969. Biogenetic law is as dead as a doornail, 1988. 1997. Haeckel was convicted of fraud, but the drawings persist. Biology textbook at the University of West Florida, down in Pensacola, still teaching the embryology. Now, Haeckel's fake drawings, his exact drawings, still used at the University of North Dakota. It's just simply a lie. So my contention is, teach evolution if you want, but don't use lies to promote it. And I go through about 30 lies on my videotape, lies in the textbooks, video number 4. You can get in my series. So I wish we'd get some honest evolutionists that would say, you know, we like our theory and we believe our theory. That's fine. But we should stop lying for evidence for our theory. They're telling the kids, I could go through 100 of them here, that the whale, see slide number 15, 18. The textbooks are telling the kids that the whale has a vestigial pelvis. There isn't an intelligent biologist on the planet that believes this is true. Those little bones in the whale's abdomens are part of its reproductive system. Male and female bones are different. They have to mate underwater in the dark with no hands, and they can't talk and say, scoot over, honey. They have to have special muscles and special bones to control all this apparatus to make it fit together. This has nothing to do with evolution. So take it out of the textbook. But they're saying the whales used to walk on land. The whale retains pelvic and leg bones as useless vestiges. Still teaching it at the Jeannie Scott, still teaching it long after it's been proven wrong. Glencoe Biology, major publisher of textbooks, saying the whale has a vestigial pelvis that serves no function. Tell that to the whale. Modern whales have hind limbs which have been reduced to a few tiny internal hind limb bones that have no function. AJ, have you spent 3 seconds trying to get this lie out of the textbook? Or do you like it in there because it supports your religion? Just imagine whales walking around. Los Angeles Museum of Natural History has a whale skeleton hanging there. There's the bones right there. Those are not vestigial legs. They never have been legs. They were not legs. They're not going to be legs. They're part of the reproductive system. Nothing to do with walking on land. But they teach this in schools like it's part of it. National Geographic says humans or the whales had and dolphins had legs a long time ago. Whale's pelvis is located far from the vertebra and has no apparent function. The whale doesn't have a pelvis. That's the leg bone right there. We got one in our museum in the next room. Come on down, AJ, I'll show it to you. It's got a blood supply, a nerve supply. It's part of the control apparatus for making baby whales. Got nothing to do with walking on land, but they teach it like it's part of it. Vestigial structures, like the pelvic bones in the baleen whale. It's in all the textbooks. So my contention is, teach, he asked, what should be taught? AJ, science should be taught in science class. We should teach science. What do we know? The word see or know. What do we know? We know whales make baby whales. We do not know that amoeba turned to whales. You can believe that if you want, but that's your religion. That's why evolution should not be taught. It's not only dangerous, it's dumb. So keep it at home, please. I don't want to pay to teach it. Go ahead.
Awesome. Just on time. And it looks like we are heading into the rebuttal portion of the debate. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your opening statements. I appreciate the visuals. We've got some great questions coming in already from the audience, and we've got a lively chat tonight. So why don't we hand it over to AJ. AJ, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal. What I'll do is I'll give you a 1 minute warning at the 4 minute mark, and that way you'll know to start winding it down. AJ, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, that was a very nice gish gallop. I think I counted about 8 or 9 different things you brought up. But as for we shouldn't have public schools, I would like you to explain how the parents of these children can simultaneously work and teach their own children. Saying that you just want the parents to teach their own kids kind of strikes me as being indoctrination. And we've never seen an animal change to a different kind. Well, I provided an example in my opening statement of multicellularity coming from a single-celled organism over the course of 50 weeks. So it's not millions of years. Did the amoeba produce a dog? No, you're fundamentally misrepresenting evolution. And when you say produce, like dogs produce dogs, that's saying a dog gives birth to another dog. But when you talk about an amoeba producing a dog, that's over the course of millions and millions of years. And like I said, we don't need to see an amoeba, a single-celled creature, a single-celled organism producing a multi-celled organism in the past. I gave an example of it. And bigger finches do better in the cold environments. Yeah, that's natural selection. That's animals adapting to their environment. So thank you for providing proof of evolution, Kent. I don't even want to get into the gill slits thing, but I'm just going to skip that. The whale pelvis, I suppose it's a coincidence that the bones that are shrunken are exactly where the legs of a four-legged animal would be. And the same thing in the dolphins. And again, you're misrepresenting the definition of what a vestigial structure is, because even if the bones help the whale guide its 15-foot penis, then that's a new function. That doesn't mean that can still be vestigial. It doesn't mean that the structure has no function at all. It just means that it has a different function. The brochure you showed from National Center for Science Education, you showed the front cover of it where it says that did a cow evolve into a whale? If you would open the second page of that and actually read it, you would see that that's a joke. The brochure talks about hippos and whales having common ancestry. So I've actually seen that pamphlet. And the book you showed on whales, I can't get lies out of a textbook because that's a children's book about whales. And as for getting lies out of the textbook, well, your bill that I showed had false information in it. So I would like you to explain how that bill is trying to get lies out of the textbook when it basically had a lie in it. I mean, I don't know if it was intentional, but the information about the mammoth said that it had radiocarbon dates where they gave two different dates for the same animal, but it wasn't the same animal. It was a different mammoth. Yeah, and I guess I'll touch on the gill splits, but I hope that it doesn't take up all of the time in our open discussion. When they say gill slits, they're not talking about actual physical gills. They're pharyngeal pouches or pharyngeal arches. The same thing that fish embryo have, human embryos have the same thing. They're not actual gills. They just become bones and glands in humans, but they become gills in the fish when the embryo grows to its adult form. So it's not actual gills. And schools don't teach the Haeckel's theory. And also, I would like some evidence that he was ever tried for fraud, because I've never seen any actual evidence that that happened. And I'll just concede the rest of my time.
Okay, that's 50 seconds we can throw into either the open discussion or question and answer period. So that being said, we can hand it over to Kent. Kent, you now have 5 minutes of uninterrupted rebuttal. Whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. He called it the Gish Gallop. Dwayne Gish used to do a lot of debates against atheists. They got so frustrated because he beat them so badly that they developed a term to distract attention, calling it the Gish Gallop. You go through so many points. Well, that's like if I point out 20 things you're teaching that are wrong, then therefore it's not true because I gave 20 of them. What if I gave one? I cannot believe that you're still saying that the gill slits should still be taught because they're not gills, they're just arches. You're completely missing the point, AJ, deliberately, I know. They are not gill slits. They don't function as gill slits. They're folds of skin. I've got folds of skin in my elbow and I can't breathe through them, okay? They're simply folds of skin on the embryo growing. You need to learn some biology. That is not evidence for evolution. The folds of skin develop into totally different functions. Glands in the throat, bones in the ear. You don't breathe through your ear. So shame on you for not being honest and saying, look, we ought to get this out of the books, guys. It's not true. And as far as the whale pelvis now serving a different function, how did they make babies before? The fact that those bones are in the same region as where their legs are on other animals, well, duh. That's where the reproductive organs are on most animals that do have legs. Of course, it's in the same region. What do you want them on top of their head? No, this is just a lie to teach the kids that the whale has a vestigial pelvis. It's not true. The textbooks do teach charts like I have up here, showing humans and pine trees and whales and fish having a common ancestor from an amoeba. Your example of an amoeba becoming a colony or a multicellular organism, even if it did, okay? Can it survive? Can it reproduce? Can that cluster of amoebas that coalesce to over 50 weeks to make this multicellular amoeba, is there another one someplace it can mate with, and now can it produce a multicellular colony instantly? How do they make babies? I'd like to hear more about this research, because even if you get this one example where an amoeba can colonize and turn into the equivalent of a unit that works together, a cohesive unit like the military does with their squads and armies, so what? Is that therefore science, that an amoeba turned to a human? What you've observed is an amoeba may, over 50 weeks, I'll do some research on that, has been able to colonize to protect itself from some threat out there. Who did it mate with, and did it produce another colony? Is this actually a new organism? No, it's not, and you know it's not. And you're really desperate. You know how many changes there would have to be to change an amoeba to a pine tree and a whale and a human? Trillions and trillions, which is why you guys rely on your favorite topic, time. This is the pacifier, AJ, that keeps you guys believing this. Time. Boy, we've got time for this to happen. It took 50 weeks for the amoebas to get together. So over billions of years, the amoeba could turn to a human. You really believe that? Okay, and you're welcome to believe it, but it's not science. What should we teach in science class? We should teach science, things that we know. The kids can learn all about the anatomy. They can learn all about the muscles of the body, the bones of the body, the radius, the ulna, the carpals, the metacarpals, the humerus, the scapula, learn all the muscles that attach to them, the biceps, triceps, quadriceps, and never discuss evolution. It's not part of science. If a kid says, teacher, we got 2 bones in our wrist and my cat has 2 bones in his leg. Yep, interesting anatomy. Yeah, you don't have to say that proves a common ancestor. The teacher could say, well, there's options here. It could mean they're related to a common ancestor, or it could mean they had a common designer. The lug nuts on my GMC will fit on a Chevy. That's proof they came from a Toyota or a skateboard. I mean, in your mind, all you can see with your tunnel vision is these similarities prove common ancestor, when it's just as logical to say there's a common designer behind these things. As far as parents indoctrinating their children, shame on you. Are you a communist? Do you think the government should decide what kids are taught? No, the parent should decide what they want their kids to be taught, not you, AJ, not me. If they want them to learn their grandpa was a rock, okay, teach them that. But I don't want to pay for that. If they want to teach the kids that amoebas turned into whales like this chart shows, okay, you can teach them that. But I don't want to pay for that, because that's not part of science. Science is what we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate, experimentation. We don't observe any animal producing anything other than its kind. So I want you to send me the research. Did your amoeba colony, or whatever you want to call it,
10 seconds,
develop to the point where it can reproduce as a colony? This is not evolution. And you're really desperate. If that's the only example you've got, you would need trillions of examples like that to make your rock or your amoeba turn to a human. So we'll go over all of them. Gish Gallop, parents indoctrination, amoeba dog. You said the amoeba turned to a dog over millions of years. There we go. Time. That'll do it, won't it?
That's time, Dr. Hovind. Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. That concludes the opening statements and rebuttals. So thanks to the both of you. We are now moving into a cordial discussion portion where, as always, we'll do our best to keep it equally timed, focusing on one topic at a time. Since Kent just ended his rebuttal, why don't we hand it over to AJ? AJ, why don't you start us off with the discussion portion? You are muted. Make sure you unmute yourself. And gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, with the example of Chlamydomonas, the multicellular algae, it gained new cells that have reproductive function, but in most multicellular species of algae, individual cells produce special sex cells called gametes that contain only one set of chromosomes, and the gametes from two individuals fuse sexually and can develop directly into offspring, or they can form cells that produce spores that create more algae. And I also, you said that you don't want to pay for kids to learn evolution, but isn't Dinosaur Adventureland registered as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization since it's a ministry, which means that it doesn't pay property taxes?
Are you asking? Or
it's an open discussion. No, it's open discussion.
Well, yeah, Dinosaur Adventureland is properties tax exempt. We don't pay for the public schools. That's correct. We pay gas tax and all kinds of other taxes on our stuff.
Sure.
It's off topic, though. The fact is, public schools should not teach lies. Don't teach lies. Teach truth. Get the lies out of the books. And you're left with nothing to support your theory. It's a lie to teach the kids the Earth is billions of years old. There's over 100 ways to prove it cannot be billions of years old, but you guys keep teaching it because that is what you have to have. Get it right side up. Time. I know full well your amoeba or algae stayed an algae. Didn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Things don't transform into different monsters. Like, this isn't Pokemon.
I have no idea what Pokemon is, nor do I care, but...
Well, okay, when you say one amoeba turns into a dog, one animal doesn't turn into another animal. Evolution is about population genetics. So you have a population of one type of organism, and over time, it develops into different populations because of natural selection. That's macroevolution. So it's not one animal just changing into a different animal. But I think you're framing it like that because you want to make evolution sound stupid, and then so you can make fun of it. Yeah.
But AJ, you said the populations develop over time. This is your belief. This never been observed. You certainly can't use any fossils as evidence. In any court of law, an honest court of law, they would laugh at you by saying, look, you found bones in the dirt, you found fossils, you don't know they had any children. You certainly couldn't prove it different. No animal today produces other than its kind. Every creature observed, plant or animal or insect, produces the same kind as itself. Mosquitoes make baby mosquitoes without exception. Now you can believe that over time it could do it, but that's your sky daddy. Time, billions of years will solve the problem.
So is a single-celled organism the same kind as a multi-celled organism?
I don't know. Is it actually a colony? Is it a cluster of cells working together?
It's not a colony because in a colony, each cell can break off and live on its own. But in the example I gave, the cells can't live on their own. And it got new traits like the extracellular matrix that binds the new cells together. And it was also a beneficial mutation, or it was beneficial. Well,
answer my question then, AJ. Can this new... you don't want to call it a colony. Can this new multicellular
organism? Yeah.
Can this new multicellular organism produce with another multicellular organism just like it and make multicellular organisms? Or do they have to start with individual cells every time?
Well, that sounds like sexual reproduction, which is not something that algae does. But the example I gave in the lab, it was a single cell going to a multicellular one. So yeah, It started with a single cell, just like you did in your mother's womb. You started off as a single cell, and you divided and added new cells until you became, all the cells you have today. And it's the same thing with evolution. That's like Evo Devo.
Oh, no, it's not evolution. Come on. Going from a single sperm and egg to a human being is following an incredibly complex code. Go to General Motors. They take a bunch of parts coming into one end, and out comes the car on the other end. Because a whole lot of intelligent people are GM's a bad example. Honda. They produce a car.
Your example earlier, I forget what brands of car you said, like GMC and Honda. You said like
and Chevy, right? Lug nuts will interchange.
They both share the same lug nuts, but those didn't have a common designer. They had different designers.
So the lug nuts on a Chevy and the lug nuts on a GMC had different designers?
Yeah, they didn't have a common designer, like you said. So it's a bad example. And also, when you talk about, this isn't evolution, this isn't evidence for common ancestry, it's evidence for a common ancestor. I would like to know where you get that conclusion from. It sounds to me like it's just something you say because they both have the word common in the phrase, so it sounds kind of, like pithy and smart, but you're just making an assumption. The reason that scientists have proof of common ancestry is the genetics. You don't have anything like that to back up common designer.
The proof that we have is billions of farmers for hundreds of years observing. You plant corn, corn grows. You cross your cows and you get a baby cow. I mean, every farmer on the planet will tell you that happens with all the plants, with all the animals. We have lots of observation of the variations being limited and being the same, obviously, kind. I think there are 60 varieties of oak trees now. They might have had a common ancestor called an oak tree. But you want me to have to pay to teach the kids that the oak tree.
What about bears? What about bears?
There are 8 varieties of bears. I don't know if they all had a common ancestor or not. God might have made 4 or 5 or 6 different kinds of bears.
Like grizzly bears?
Grizzly bears, polar bears, panda bears.
Okay, what about koala bears?
Bear.
Are koala bears the same kind as a grizzly bear?
I don't know. Somebody gave it the name koala bear. I doubt it. I don't think koala's in the bear category. But this is training at a net. Go back to my question. Your algae that developed the ability to live and work together in what you called a multicellular organism. How do you get another one of those? Do you have to start from scratch every time with individual algae? Or can they somehow make a colony into not a colony? Can this new organism produce another organism? Or does it have to start over with algae every time? AJ?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head. I would assume that it can start with either a single cell or another like small multicellular one that adds cells to it. But I would assume that it divides, and that new single cell one can produce a multicellular organism. But this hasn't been observed in the wild. This example of Chlamydomonas algae, this was only done in the lab, and so I can't really speculate about that.
Well, if it's only done in the lab, don't you see a problem here? Because this is not natural selection. This is artificial selection. There's nothing natural about it. And that you rely on that one example to say we should all teach that the amoebas turned to humans and whales over billions of years. I'll give you quadrillions of years if you want. We don't observe it. It's a religious belief. It's something you believe in, which is fine. Keep your religion at home. I don't want to pay for it to be taught. That's all.
Well, you don't.
Yeah. There's all kinds of things that goes into the public schools besides property tax. And I've paid plenty of property tax over the years. So you're missing the point completely. All the parents are required to pay to teach that the amoeba turned to a whale. That's what the charts show. I've got all the pictures right from the textbook. I show it in my seminar. You've seen it. And you're dancing around the obvious. God said they'll bring forth after their kind. Do these multicellular algae things, do they bring forth? Or is it a dead end? You got to start over with single cells every time. And I already know the answer. You got to start over with single cells every time. So you haven't done a thing. You created a colony, I'll call it a colony, that built a wall around themselves to protect themselves. Okay, interesting.
It's not a colony. And I'm not relying on simply one example. There are lots of
give me 5,000 more, please, because you got to have billions of examples to prove your religion, not 1 or 2.
Well, the genetics show that you can follow it back like a roadmap to see that animals that are alive today have common ancestry with each other. The same as you would look at a DNA test to see that you are related to your mom and dad. Like I did 23andMe, and they got a saliva sample from me, but they didn't ask me, what religion I was. It had nothing to do with religion. So common ancestry can be proven by genetics, and that proves evolution. But there's also
wait, slow down now. Common answer.
Okay.
No, don't gish gallop through this. We'll call it
Well,
the AJ
you
gallop.
asked me to give several topics, but yeah, I'm
Okay,
not
well,
going to dish gallop.
The
Like you did.
DNA that you had the 23andMe test showed that you came from your parents. I could have told you that without the test, okay? So
But you couldn't
were
have
your
told me
parents
who my
human?
parents were.
Oh, well,
Yes.
did they conclude your parents were human, or were they something other than human?
They're human.
They were human. How about the grandparents? You think they were human?
Sure.
If you go back 10 billion generations, was it an amoeba?
I don't know, but I would say no, it wasn't an amoeba. But again, you're intentionally going over this long period of time to compare things that are way different because you don't have a strong enough argument to argue your side. So you have to instead use these tactics of making evolution seem silly by saying, you know, oh, look, an amoeba. Look at, I'm a human, I'm a multicellular organism. But if you go all the way back, I wasn't an amoeba, but I just showed you that a single-celled organism can turn into a multicellular one, which is exactly what you're describing, an amoeba being the ancestor of a human, or a eukaryotic cell being a single-celled organism being the ancestor.
Okay, well, we'll take your algae instead of an amoeba then. Why did the DNA in 23andMe show that your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was an algae? The algae that example you gave turned into a new, we'll call it a new organism, a bunch of algae cells together.
So it's a new kind.
What?
It's a new kind.
Okay. How do you get the next one? Do they start over every time with single cell?
I described how multicellular algae reproduce earlier.
Yeah, each one's got to start over every time. The DNA code, I can't believe you evolutionists want to use DNA. You should be embarrassed. DNA is the most complex molecule in the universe. There's no molecule more complex than a single DNA strand, and they are incredibly tiny. It's a gross oversimplification to say it's only got 4 parts, CATG. Each of those parts is incredibly complicated. You have probably 37 trillion cells in your body. Each cell contains these DNA. The gametes only have 23, but the rest have 46 chromosomes. One drop of blood would have 5 million red blood cells in one drop. 5 million. Each of those cells contains this whole unbelievable code. You know how many people it has taken over the years to reduce the size of a computer from the size of this room down to a chip you can hold on your finger? There's taken a whole lot of smart people to do that. And the DNA code is 1 trillion times more complicated than the biggest computer we've got. Average human has 50 trillion cells in their body, but it would only fill 2 tablespoons. That's the incredible code. Stretched out, each DNA molecule is about 6 feet long. Tie them all together, the DNA code from your body, each one about 2 meters long, a little over 6 feet, would go 13 trillion miles. All that's in you, AJ. Why can't you say, wow, God, you are smart? You want to give credit to an algae for making this incredible code? I'm baffled that you guys can't.
That's not what I said. And I'm not sure where you get to God or Jesus from the information that you just presented, but DNA is not like a computer code. I can tell you that because DNA can be redundant, where you can change one of the letters or multiple letters of the CATG code and nothing happens to the organism. But with writing computer code like C++ or JavaScript, a lot of times if you have one bracket or period out of place, it can completely screw up the program that you're trying to write. So they're not the same.
Point. Stop and think about what you just said. One little mistake, your mutations that you guys rely on.
No, in the computer code
screws up the code. It quits working.
Yeah, in computer code, but not in DNA.
Oh, okay. Bill Gates said DNA is like software program, but it's much more complex than anything we've been able to design. IBM models its newest computers after DNA.
Bill Gates, the known atheist.
Yeah, he won't be when he dies.
Okay. So
the
it's a quote
DNA code contains half of the contents of all the academic libraries in America. Goes way beyond terabytes and petabytes to exabytes, yottabytes, and zettabytes. All the words ever uttered by anyone who ever lived would amount to 5 exabytes. Your DNA code has more than that. If you typed out the DNA code in your body, AJ, you'd have enough books to fill Grand Canyon 78 times. And you really think it happened by chance? I'm baffled. See, I don't have a problem saying, God, I want to praise you. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I can look at a complex thing like my Swiss Army knife and say, wow, this is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting, complicated, well made. I like this thing. I would never dream of saying, wow, the Swiss are stupid and it happened by chance. No, the guys were pretty smart to put this thing together like they did. And you talk about a computer.
By chance, you just mean that it wasn't created by a deity, then I guess so. But I wouldn't say that the life on Earth came by chance. You know, evolution is a natural process. It's not something that happens by random chance. It's driven by the environment. DNA is plastic to the environment. So like you said, animals like birds that have a larger mass are going to do better, or animals that have thicker fur are going to do better in cold climates because the environment changes what animal will do better there. So that's not random chance. That's pretty logical.
No, AJ, natural selection selects.
Well, it's
It
evolution.
doesn't create anything. It
No one ever
selected
said
the
that it
larger
did.
body sparrows. It only
No one
selected
claims that it created anything.
Well, real quick, I'm going to
Natural
jump in there.
selection.
I'm going to jump in because we'll just let Dr. Hovind finish his point. AJ, then we'll throw it back to you for equal time. Go ahead, Kent.
Yes, all natural selection did was select the bigger bodied sparrows to survive in the north. It didn't create the sparrow. It didn't turn him into a whale. It didn't turn him into a seagull. They're still a sparrow. They're just now slightly larger because the bigger ones were able to survive and make the next generation of babies, which are probably more of those will be bigger. Every farmer on the planet does this to get cows that give more milk or cows that give more beef, cows that can stand the heat, cows that can stand the cold. They've developed who knows how many varieties of cows now, probably a couple of hundred, and they're always cow. So the sparrow, natural selection works great, but it only selects. You guys want to turn it into a creative process. It doesn't create a thing. Sorry, strike 3, you're out. Go ahead.
Okay,
I apologize
AJ,
for
go ahead.
interrupting.
Equal time. Oh, no, that's fine. We'll hand it back to you. AJ, equal time. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think anybody. I certainly didn't claim that natural selection creates things. It's simply a mechanism of evolution. It's one part of it, like sexual selection or genetic drift or anything like that. So you can't just claim that natural selection creates organisms. It's just deciding, or it just shows which animals do better in which environments because they adapted to their environment, which also kind of shows that, in my opinion, they weren't created for their environment. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to adapt. You would just have animals put directly in the environment they belonged in.
Are you going to Q&A now, or should I respond more to that?
No, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Hovind. You can respond to that.
Well, yeah, he's welcome to believe this, but why weren't they created? I think the fact that God gave the original cow the gene code, which is incredibly complex, to allow it to adapt to milk cows or dairy cows, milk cows or beef cows, is pretty cool. But it's still a cow. That's all we've ever seen is variations within the same kind. They've been trying to work with dogs to produce smaller dogs or bigger dogs, and they spent hundreds and thousands of dollars to make a dog like a Chihuahua that's completely useless and wouldn't survive 2 minutes out in the woods. They didn't create anything. Natural selection turned all the dogs loose in the woods. Within 1 year, 95% of those that man has created would be dead. The hawks would have a heyday with the Chihuahua. The bigger ones wouldn't survive because they can't run fast enough. The ones with the wrinkled skin, although they can't even see anything. 95% of the dogs man has created with a lot of work and time and energy wouldn't survive. Natural selection would put them all back to a wolf-like animal. Been a wolf and a dog probably have a common ancestor, but it doesn't mean it's an amoeba or an algae.
Okay, can I ask why is it that you would think if you took all of the skulls of different dogs, like a Doberman, a Rottweiler, and a Chihuahua, and even a teacup Chihuahua, all of those are the same kind. But if you look at the skulls of like Australopithecus afarensis and Sediba, and you lay those out all the way up to Homo sapien, you would say that one is ape kind and one is the man kind. Those aren't the same kind, even though the dog skulls look radically different. And the human to Australopithecus skulls look very similar.
Well, with dogs, we see not only the skulls, we can see the animals. They can produce the animals. A friend of mine said, we have a dog kennel. We've raised dogs for 100 years. My grandfather started the kennel. I'm third generation. He said, I can tell you right now, we give us 20 generic dogs. Pick any dog you want. 100 years with selective breeding, we can make everything from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane all over again in 100 years of selective breeding. You get a creature like an amoeba with a much shorter generation span of 20 minutes. They, get born, grow up, get married in 20 minutes and have their own babies. That you still only see them produce amoeba. That's it. It doesn't happen. Now, I love the great faith you guys have. You have incredible faith in this natural selection process. You have probably more faith than most Christians I know of. But it's not science. And the purpose of this debate was, should evolution be taught in public schools? Depends what you mean by that word. But we shouldn't teach lies to promote the theory. So to get back on topic, to say that these algae slowly develop an ability to work together, but you got to start over every time to get a new, whatever you call the chlamydomonas thing, chlamydomonas. Okay, it's still algae. It's still this. That's not evidence that that's going to ever eventually turn into a whale or a mosquito or a pine tree. But you guys want me to pay to have that taught to the kids like it's part of science. I'm sorry, it's not. Go start a private school and teach that to anybody that wants to pay and come learn it. But the public schools, if they're for the public, should teach science. Ignore the origins topic altogether. The teacher could say, I'm sorry, we can't talk about creation or evolution. Let's just talk about science. This is the deltoid. This is the biceps. This is the triceps. Memorize it for the test, kid. Yeah, but how did we get it? I don't know. Don't know. Don't care. Doesn't matter. Memorize it. That's science. What do we know? We know dogs produce dogs. We do not know that the algae turned to a dog over billions of years, like you said. You believe that, but you don't admit that it's a religious belief. I can't understand why you guys can't just admit, man, I do have a religion, don't I? Yeah, you do.
If you want to teach science in the science classes, then shouldn't we teach what a majority of scientists agree on, which is that evolution is a fact and a scientific theory that should be taught in the schools? That's what the scientists think.
You should look at the history of science. They've taught all kinds of crazy things over the generations that later proved to be not true. So no, science means knowledge. Now, in a religion class, if you want to teach all the different religions of the world and what they believe, like the Hindus think, if you drink the pee coming straight out of the cow, you get special holy powers.
So we should teach science in science class, but science has been wrong a bunch of times, and we shouldn't trust scientists. Is that what you're saying?
No, I love science. I like science. We can trust real science, but all you guys have to promote your religion of evolution is lies. The embryo does not have gill slits. The whale does not have a vestigial pelvis. Nobody's ever seen mutations, which are mistakes in the gene code, which, like you said, with the computer code will oftentimes stop it. One bracket, one period, wrong spot, bingo, stops the program. I agree. The DNA code is able to work around that. It's so complex, it can tolerate some mistakes and usually corrects them over a generation or two, and they might come right back. The cave fish, the fish that have lived in caves where there's no light have slowly lost their eyes. That's a loss. You don't have any examples of anything gaining new information. None. Why hasn't anybody ever evolved eyes on the back of their head? That would be really handy. How many have ever wished you had eyes on the back of your head? Yeah, come on now. Why hasn't a mother ever evolved 3 arms so they can hold the baby and cook the food and close the fridge door at the same time? It doesn't happen, AJ. It just doesn't happen. You can believe it all you want, and you have great faith. But I'm sorry, that's all you have is a faith that your algae is going to evidence that everything came from a common ancestor. You really, really need to stop and think about that.
I'm going to jump in real quick, AJ. We've got just 40 seconds left on the discussion portion. AJ, why don't you respond to whatever you'd like to from Kent, and then we're going to jump into 3-minute closing statements, and then an audience Q&A for as long as we can. So AJ, go ahead.
Okay, I would say the reason that those silly things didn't happen is because evolution is about what an organism or population of organisms needs to survive, not just what might come in handy. And as for a beneficial mutation, I can give you an example of a resistance to malaria evolving, not a resistance to, sickle cell anemia. And this isn't a trait where you have, the weakness of malaria. This is, you're born with a resistance to it. So I'll just sacrifice the rest of my time. We can go to Q&A.
So that looks like it concludes the discussion portion, but I want you guys to kind of wrap things up in terms of a 3-minute closing statement, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So AJ, you did start, so technically you have up to 3 minutes right now if you'd like to wrap up your points in the form of a concluding statement. Then Dr. Hovind gets 3 minutes, then we'll get to a few questions from the audience. So AJ, go ahead.
Okay. Well, this is my first debate, so I'd like to thank Kent for, accepting this. And I know he's a lot more experienced than I am, but I think we might have gotten a bit off topic, but that kind of happens in these debates where, a lot of topics are flying back and forth. But in my opinion, if you want to teach science in science classes, then you should look to what the scientific consensus is. You should look to what the scientists agree on and what their opinion is on the topic, which is, should evolution be taught in public schools? And they would say yes. Now, I'm not as qualified as those biological and life scientists would be, so I defer to their opinion, whereas Kent is challenging the scientific consensus. So he has a huge burden of proof if he wants to knock down the scientific consensus. And like I said earlier, he can't really complain about having to pay for public schools teaching this because he, runs a ministry, which is tax exempt. He can have his disagreements, but like I said, he's disagreeing with a 100 years of scientific evidence, consensus, and scientific knowledge. So I don't think arguing that humans came from a rock or talking about whales having babies is going to refute that. I think you'll have to do a little bit better than that. How much time do I have left, SFT?
You got 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Okay. And the scientific consensus about evolution is that if you look at the genetic data, we can tell that organisms are related, just like a family tree, just like the genetic data that would tell you that who your cousins and your parents and your grandparents are, or what ethnicity you're from. Like I did 23andMe, and it tells you what country you have the most genetic data from, and we can follow this back in time to tell that all life on Earth has common ancestry. And I'm just gonna end it there.
No problem. So that was your 3-minute concluding statement. Thank you so much, Atheist Jr. We're going to hand it over to Kent. You have 3 minutes for a concluding statement.
Well, obviously, the argument he gave in his closing here, the argument from majority opinion, would fall apart in any person with any brain. Under Muslim countries, the majority believe if you kill a Christian, that's a wonderful thing. That's how you get to heaven. Of course, you can get to, you have to kill the infidels. The majority opinion in those countries, and there's a whole lot of Muslims, and they're making more, is majority opinion. Well, wow, then there must be right. In communist countries, look how they enforce communism with the point of a gun. Look what's happening in China or Russia or other communist countries. You want to go by majority. Like Hitler, 55 million people followed Adolf Hitler. Wow, Hitler's a great guy. We know he was wrong, but the majority of people in Germany thought he was a great guy. So the argument from majority opinion falls flat on its face. What is truth? The truth is algae produce algae. And if you can get some to work together in a laboratory, so what? It doesn't prove anything. That's your point, though. The DNA, as you rely on DNA, the DNA code, as I pointed out, is unbelievably complex. The DNA code is mind-boggling. It has to unzip, make a copy of itself, and then zip back together. Study DNA, for heaven's sake. It's unreal. And yet you want to believe it happened by chance. Okay, I just don't have enough faith to believe that. And obviously, AJ, we need to go along with Pascal's wager here. It still holds true. If you are right and I am wrong, I haven't lost a thing. I've lived a wonderful life. I enjoy life. And I could die and I go back to dust. Okay, that's fine. But if I'm right and you're wrong, when you die, you face God and go to hell. I don't want that. You want to risk that gamble? Or because of your algae? Okay, I don't think that's very wise, though. You can have my time. Let's get back to Q&A time, brother.
Okay. I appreciate that concluding statement, Dr. Hovind. And great debate, gentlemen. I've got way too many questions here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a timer on the Q&A. We'll do 15 minutes, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. Once we hit that 15-minute mark, we will call it a night. So great job to the both of you. And let's go with, I'm going to pick out the most relevant questions to the debate topic. Looks like there's an after show on Logical, Plausible, Probables channel immediately following this debate. So thanks so much from Steadfast and Easy. He says, thank you for a great debate. $10 super chat. I appreciate that. As well as One God is Nowhere. $25 super chat. I appreciate the support. He says, it's more of a comment. He says DNA equals medium, gene equals code, source equals God. If you guys want to respond to that, it's not really a question, just a super chat that came in.
I don't see how that adds up. It seems like you're just making an assertion.
Okay, well, I see how it adds up. If I'm walking along the beach and I find a calculator watch on the beach, I think it would be very logical to assume somebody designed it, rather than to assume it washed up on the beach or the waves created it out of the sand grains. I just don't think that's logical. So I think it's logical to look at the DNA and say, wow, this must have had a really smart designer. I wonder who it was. Was it Allah or Buddha or Jehovah? That's a different argument.
It was Allah.
It must have had a designer. It's way more complicated than any code man has ever written. Had to have a designer. I don't have a problem believing that.
Praise Allah.
Praise Allah. Go ahead.
I'm going to jump to this super chat here, which is actually a question for AJ. So this question comes from Alec Cox. Thank you so much for the super chat. He says, question for AJ. Can a cell survive without glucose? Where did the glucose come from to help make the first cell?
Can a cell survive without glucose? That seems like two questions. I would say no, because that's how it gets energy. What was the second part of it?
He says, where did the glucose come from to make the first cell?
To make the first cell ever? I'm not sure if the very first living cell used glucose, so I'm just going to say that I don't know.
Okay, I appreciate that answer and question. Dr. Hovind, if you wanted a response as well, go ahead.
Well, obviously, I would say that the creator designed it where you got everything with everything it needs. You know, the first living cell would have to have a lot more than glucose. It would have to have space to live in. It would have to have energy. It'd have to have a proper temperature to survive. I'm sure every cell will die at some extreme temperature, up or down. So and then it's got to have a food source and a method of respiration, a method of digestion, a method of excretion. There's a lot. One cell is more complex than the space shuttle. I just can't believe that you can't see it had to have a designer. Okay.
Okay, thanks for that response, Ken. And since it was your question, AJ, to be fair, we'll give you the last word on that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if Kent has ever seen a diagram of a space shuttle,
But if I compared a cell to that, I would say the space shuttle is far more complicated. Yeah, I'm not sure if the question was talking about if the very first cell that ever existed, or one of the very first cells that ever existed used glucose, or if they're talking about modern single cell organisms. So I'm not sure about that one.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. We got a super chat that came in. Martin Luther, thank you so much. He just says, tell Kent Jeremy says hi, brother, and thank you for your ministry. So I appreciate that.
Hi, Jerry.
Jeremy. Let's see here. Okay, so next question is for both. So whoever wants to start on this one, this question comes in from Art Vandalay. He says, a question for both. Does the fossil record show microevolution?
Go ahead, AJ.
Yes, I would say that it does, because you can see going up from the bottom layers to higher layers, you can see small incremental changes from one organism or one index fossil to a different one. So if you're looking at a crab that's in one layer, I'm just using that as a random example, you can see changes from the lower layer, and this is consistent all the way up. The organisms become more complex. They're the most simple at the bottom, and they become more complex as you go up in the geologic column.
Go ahead, Kent.
Well, there's no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils. I've got thousands of them in our museum here. There's no question there are fossils, but they're not a record. They don't have a date on them. They don't talk. And he mentioned something that's a key thing: the bottom layer up to the top layer. AJ, all of the layers on the Earth, all of them, are the same age. All of them. If the top layer is younger, where's this coming from? Outer space? Is material being added to the Earth to create these new layers? All of the layers were a shaking and shuffling of existing material. Of course, different animals settle into different layers because of body density, because of habitat. I bet most of the clams are found together because clams hang out together. They don't hang out with mosquitoes. So, of course, the fossils are found in similar layers.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Atheist Jr. Okay, that's okay. Let's jump to the next question. We got so many questions coming in; it's hard to keep up. Two super chats here. George Bond, thank you so much, brother. Says SFT's kids need it. Yeah, putting my kids through college. I appreciate it. We got another super chat for Atheist Jr. I guess you're gonna have an after show. We've got 4 after shows apparently. So chats came in, one for AJ, Logical, Plausible, Probable, Otangelo, and Amy. So here's a question for Dr. Hovind. Call Me Emo asks, what's allowing organisms within the same kind to share common ancestry, and what's preventing them from sharing common ancestry with the kinds closest to them?
Well, there seem to be genetic barriers. Any farmer will tell you you can cross a jackass and a horse and get a mule, but then it's sterile. You run into a dead end. Almost you can cross a sheep and a goat and get a geep, but again, it's sterile. You get a dead end. So I think a sheep and a goat they look similar in hundreds of ways, and they act similar in hundreds of ways, and they might even taste similar. I don't know. But that doesn't prove a mosquito and a sheep are related. What we've observed is most of the variations that happen, if you get too far to the extreme, they go extinct. You might get a bigger and bigger dog, but at some point it becomes clumsy and can't take care of itself. They've been trying to get bigger dogs for a long time. Why don't they get a dog as big as an elephant? There are mammals as big as an elephant, like an elephant. So there seems to be a limit to the genetic variation. Seems to be limited. They've been trying to get smaller mammals, dogs down to the size of a Chihuahua. Okay, why don't they get one the size of a hamster? There's a limit somewhere in there. It seems to be a genetic barrier. And I think every farmer will tell you if you get too far away from the original ordinary dog or cow or whatever you're dealing with, it's probably going to be not going to survive well in the environment. You got to babysit it. Any farmers that raise specialized grapes, for instance, you got to put them in a greenhouse and babysit them and make sure they don't got to get the right temperature, the right food. They die easy. all we've observed, every farmer in the history of humanity will tell you variations happen, but they're limited. And the further you get away from the norm, the more problems you're going to have. You don't babysit the Chihuahua, he's gone.
Thank you for that answer, Kent. AJ, if you had a quick response, go ahead.
Yeah. You said that you bring forth the donkey from the horse, but I thought animals brought forth after their kind, but the mule can't bring forth anymore because it's sterile. So I'm a bit confused on that. And I'll just leave it there.
Well, I would say anybody, a 4-year-old looking at a donkey and a horse would probably say, that's a similar kind of animal. They can both have hooves, single hooves, not split hooves. They both have hair on the outside of their body. They got a tail on the southbound end. So I think there's lots of similarities between a donkey and a horse. More similarities than there are between a donkey and a bird. So the fact that they're able to breed at all is interesting. They got a different number of chromosomes, 162 and 164, if I recall. But I don't think there's ever been a case where they've been fertile. Has there been a fertile donkey?
I'm pretty sure humans and chimpanzees also have a difference of only 2 chromosomes, but you think they're a different kind. So.
Oh, yeah. Humans and chimpanzees, no connection whatsoever. Same designer designed them.
That's a double standard.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for keeping it lively here. We got just enough time for 2 more questions. This one comes in from Nephilim Free, gives a super chat. Thanks so much for the support. Well, actually, this one's more of a comment, kind of directed at you, Atheist Jr., so we'll allow you to respond. He says, the very existence of DNA proves creation. Nature cannot create information, semiotics, and algorithms. They can only be created by a mind. So AJ, some thoughts on that?
Well, that's an assertion. Nature does create living organisms that have DNA in it. So unless you're saying that nature is a mind, I'm a bit confused on that. And again, it seems like you're kind of just making an assertion. So I'm going to say what's asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So I'm going to dismiss your question, Neff. Sorry.
And Dr. Hovind, if you'd like a response, go ahead.
Well, I would disagree. Nature doesn't create anything. The animals create babies, and then nature may select certain ones to survive. If you get a really, really cold winter, you're probably going to kill off all the smaller ones that don't have enough mass to hold their body temperature. But it's not going to change it to something else. Natural selection only selects. It doesn't create anything. Nature is not a creative force.
All right, I appreciate that response from the both of you. Let's go right to Andrew Cummings' question. I appreciate your question. Andrew, he says, please ask Kent if he can define what he means by new information and contrast it with variation and modification. For example, is a wing still a modified forelimb?
New information. I think let's take an example of an automobile. If somebody decided to add an air conditioning system to an automobile, which they did back in the 1930s or something, that was new information added to the vehicle. I don't think you're going to find any creature that's ever had new information added through reproduction. The reptiles that run around, the skinks and other lizards that run around, probably would like to have wings to get away faster, but they don't ever get them. So no new information is ever added. The dog is still a dog. The cow is still a cow. Humans still have 2 eyes on the front. They never got the one on the back that they need for backup camera. So there are no examples of new information being added. There are only examples of information being lost. Fish going in a cave after generations, they're blind. Well, that's a loss, not a gain. I'm unaware of any examples where any new usable information has been gained by any kind of animal. Certainly not in the laboratory, and they've tried. They can't make it happen. It doesn't happen. It certainly doesn't happen in nature.
I appreciate that response, Kent. And Atheist Jr., if you had a quick response, go ahead.
Well, I didn't really hear a definition for information there, but if I had to define it, I would say new genetic information is mutations causing new nucleotide sequences to form. new letters in the ATCG sequence. So that would be my definition.
Okay, I appreciate that response. And since the question was for you, Kent, we'll give you the last word. Go ahead.
Well, nobody's ever observed this changing the letters of the alphabet around, creating something useful that's hereditary. It gets passed on. It would require trillions, quadrillions, quintillions of changes like that to change an algae to a whale. You're just dreaming. It's a religion. I've said it for years. I'll say it till I die. Evolution is a religion. It's the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the world, and it is nothing but a religion. And if you want to believe it, fine. But I resent it being in the public school system. It's a violation of our separation of church and state. Keep your religion in your atheist church.
I appreciate that response. I appreciate all the questions, guys. I know we still have some super chats and about 1,000 questions that could keep us busy for the next 10 hours, but we are at the hour and a half mark. Time has flown by. We are going to call it here. It's been a great debate. Definitely one to remember. We've had a great chat. As I pointed out, great questions. Thank you, everybody, for the support. And thank you to Dr. Hovind and AJ for doing this debate and giving us their time. So why don't we hand it to the debaters for some final words, some final thoughts before we shut it down for the night. AJ, some final thoughts, final words?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, SFT, for hosting this, and Kent for doing this with me. I know this is my first debate, so thank you to the chat for kind of bearing with me, and I really enjoyed it. So I would like to do this again, or with debates with other people. But my channel is just getting started, so hopefully I can do some more debates like this. So thank you.
I appreciate it. My pleasure. And Kent, some final words, final thoughts?
Well, sure. This July, 4th of July, we're having a big deal going on here at Dinosaur Adventureland, a boot camp to train people on creation, bring in some young speakers that are getting ministry started. AJ, come down to Dinosaur Adventureland July 2nd through the 5th over the 4th of July weekend, and we'll have a debate right here live. It'll be your second one. Give you more experience.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you for the final words from Kent, from AJ. Thanks to everybody who showed up for this debate. We had over 100 people in the chat, and it was a lot of fun. So once again, thank you so much. We'll see you this week for we got a bunch of shows, interviews, discussions, guys. Please check the upcoming live stream section to keep yourself ready and aware for the following stream. So everybody, God bless. Standing for Truth is out.